Hi Calc AB. So here is page 58D. For 0 to 8, is there a time t when the rate at which water is pumped into the tank is the same as the rate at which water is removed from the tank? Explain why or why not. We have two different functions. We have W and we have R, and W represents the rate at which water is pumped into the tank, and R of t is the rate at which water is removed from the tank. And if those rates are going to be the same, it means that they are equal, which is to compare the difference of those rates and say that they are equal, the difference of the rates is equal to 0. So we're going to look at this function right here. We know that W of t is a continuous function because it is 2000 e to the negative t squared over 20, and it's an exponential. Yes, there's other stuff happening to it, but generally it's an exponential function. We also know that R of t is continuous. And the reason we know that it's continuous is because they tell us in the text that R is differentiable. And I think that's an important thing to state, that you are interpreting something from the text, so differentiability, and that gives you continuity. All right, so now that we've said this, that W of t is continuous and R of t is continuous, their difference must also be continuous. And now we can figure out when we would have a 0, and that represents that comes from the intermediate value theorem. So if we look at the endpoints, where they're considering this on 0 to 8, we have to look at this value, and we also have to look at this value here. All right, so I'm going to take a second and I'm going to plug in the values that I have to come up with these numbers, and I'll be right back. Okay, here are my values, and you don't even really have to calculate much more than this. You just know that this number here is greater than 0, it's going to be positive, and W of 8 minus R of 8 is going to be negative. So because of that, that means somewhere in between 0 and 8, there has to be a number, there has to be a 0, because you have the function changing from a positive to a negative. We don't know where it is, but we know that there exists one. So we say that W of t minus R of t is continuous on 0 to 8. And W of 0 minus R of 0 is greater than 0. And W of 8 minus R of 8 is less than 0. Therefore, there exists a C in 0, 8 such that W of C minus R of C is equal to 0. The parentheses here are parentheses because you know exactly what the values are at 0 and 8, and you know that it's not perfectly equal to 0, so that you know exactly it should happen in the interval. So this is kind of a lengthy response, but I think it's important to note the continuity. I think it's also important to note the function W of t minus R of t. You don't necessarily have to say intermediate value theorem, because that's exactly what this part is saying right here, but you're putting in all of the requirements of intermediate value theorem, the continuity and your explanation. So that's part D.